Chapter 1 of Book 2 of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Greg Bowman. Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. Book 2, The Great Bourgeois. Chapter 1, 90 Years and 32 Teeth. In the Rue Boucherat, Rue de Normandie, and the Rue de Saint-Ange, there still exist a few ancient inhabitants who have preserved the memory of a worthy man named Monsieur Gillenormand, and who mention him with complacence. This good man was old when they were young. This silhouette has not yet entirely disappeared. For those who regard with melancholy that vague swarm of shadows which is called the past, from the labyrinth of streets in the vicinity of the Temple, to which, under Louis XIV, the names of all the provinces of France were appended exactly as in our day the streets of the New Tivoli quarter have received the names of all the capitals of Europe, a progression, by the way, in which progress is visible. Monsieur Gillenormand, who was as much alive as possible in 1831, was one of those men who had become curiosities to be viewed, simply because they have lived a long time, and who are strange because they formerly resembled everybody, and now resemble nobody. He was a peculiar old man, and in very truth a man of another age, the real, complete, and rather haughty bourgeois of the 18th century, who wore his good old bourgeoisie with the air with which marquises wear their marquisates. He was over 90 years of age. His walk was erect. He talked loudly, saw clearly, drank neat, ate, slept, and snored. He had all 32 of his teeth. He only wore spectacles when he read. He was of an amorous disposition, but declared that, for the last 10 years, he had wholly and decidedly renounced women. He could no longer please, he said. He did not add, "I am too old," but "I am too poor." He said, if I were not ruined, all he had left, in fact, was an income of about 15,000 francs. His dream was to come into an inheritance and to have 100,000 livres income for mistresses. He did not belong, as the reader will perceive, to that puny variety of octogenaries who, like M. de Voltaire, have been dying all their life. His was no longevity of a cracked pot. This jovial old man had always had good health. He was superficial, rapid, easily angered. He flew into a passion at everything, generally quite contrary to all reason. When contradicted, he raised his cane. He beat people as he had done in the great century. He had a daughter over 50 years of age and unmarried, whom he chastised severely with his tongue when in a rage, and whom he would have liked to whip. She seemed to him to be 8 years old. He boxed his servant's ears soundly and said, "Ah, carogne!" One of his oaths was by the pantoufloche of the pantouflochade. He had singular freaks of tranquillity. He had himself shaved every day by a barber who had been mad and who detested him, being jealous of Monsieur Gillenormand on account of his wife, a pretty and coquettish barberess. Monsieur Gillenormand admired his own discernment in all things, and declared that he was extremely sagacious. Here is one of his sayings: "I have, in truth, some penetration. I am able to say when a flea bites me, from what woman it came." The words which he uttered the most frequently were, "the sensible man in nature." He did not give to this last word the grand acceptation which our epoch has accorded to it, but he made it enter, after his own fashion, into his little chimney-corner satires. "Nature," he said, "in order that civilization may have a little of everything, gives it even specimens of its amusing barbarism. Europe possesses specimens of Asia and Africa on a small scale. The cat is a drawing-room tiger. The lizard is a pocket crocodile. The dancers at the opera are pink female savages. They do not eat men, they crunch them. Or magicians that they are, they transform them into oysters and swallow them. The Caribbeans leave only the bones. They leave only the shell. Such are our morals. We do not devour, we gnaw. We do not exterminate, we claw. Chapter 2. Like master, like house. He lived in the Marais, Rue des Filles du Calvaire, number 6. He owned the house. This house has since been demolished and rebuilt, and the number has probably been changed in those revolutions of numeration which the streets of Paris undergo. He occupied an ancient and vast apartment on the first floor, between street and gardens, furnished to the very ceilings with the great Gobelin and Beauvais tapestries representing pastoral scenes. The subjects of the ceilings and the panels were repeated in miniature on the armchairs. He enveloped his bed in a vast 9-leaved screen of Coromandel lacquer. Long, full curtains hung from the windows, and formed great, broken folds that were very magnificent. The garden, situated immediately under his windows, was attached to that one of them which formed the angle, by means of a staircase 12 or 15 steps long, which the old gentleman ascended and descended with great agility. In addition to a library adjoining his chamber, he had a boudoir of which he thought a great deal. A gallant and elegant retreat, with magnificent hangings of straw, with a pattern of flowers and fleur-de-lis made on the galleys of Louis XIV, and ordered of his convicts by Monsieur de Vivonne for his mistress. Monsieur Gillenormand had inherited it from a grim maternal great-aunt, who had died a centenarian. He had had 2 wives. His manners were something between those of a courtier, which he had never been, and the lawyer, which he might have been. He was gay and caressing when he had a mind. In his youth he had been one of those men who are always deceived by their wives, and never by their mistresses, because they are at the same time the most sullen of husbands and the most charming of lovers in existence. He was a connoisseur of painting. He had in his chamber a marvelous portrait of no one knows whom, painted by Jordaens, executed with great dashes of the brush, with millions of details, in a confused and haphazard manner. Monsieur Gillenormand's attire was not the habit of Louis XIV, nor yet that of Louis XVI. It was that of the incroyables of the Directory. He had thought himself young up to that period, and had followed the fashions. His coat was of light-weight cloth with voluminous reverse, a long swallow-tail, and large steel buttons. With this he wore knee-breeches and buckle-shoes. He always thrust his hands into his fobs. He said authoritatively, "The French Revolution is a heap of blackguards." Chapter 3. Luc Esprit. At the age of 16, one evening at the opera, he had had the honor to be stared at through opera glasses by 2 beauties at the same time. Ripe and celebrated beauties then, and sung by Voltaire, the Camargo and the Sale. Caught between 2 fires, he had beaten a heroic retreat towards a little dancer, a young girl named Henri, who was 16 like himself, obscure as a cat, and with whom he was in love. He abounded in memories. He was accustomed to exclaim, "How pretty she was, that Guimardini, Guimardinette! The last time I saw her at Longchamp, her hair curled in sustained sentiments, with her come and see of turquoises, her gown of the color of persons newly arrived, and her little agitation muff." He had worn in his young manhood a waistcoat of nain Londrin, which he was fond of talking about effusively. "I was dressed like a Turk of the Levantine," said he. Madame Boufflers, having seen him by chance when he was 20, had described him as a charming fool. He was horrified by all the names which he saw in politics and in power, regarding them as vulgar and bourgeois. He read the journals, the newspapers, the gazettes, as he said, stifling outbursts of laughter the while. "Oh," he said, "what people these are! Corbière, Human, Casimir Perrier. There's a minister for you! I can imagine this in a journal. Monsieur Gillenormand, minister! That would be a farce. Well, they are so stupid that it would pass." He merrily called everything by its name, whether decent or indecent, and did not restrain himself in the least before ladies. He uttered coarse speeches, obscenities, and filth with a certain tranquillity and lack of astonishment which was elegant. It was in keeping with the unceremoniousness of his century. It is to be noted that the age of paraphrase in verse was the age of crudities in prose. His godfather had predicted that he would turn out a man of genius, and had bestowed upon him these two significant names, Luc Esprit. Chapter 4. A Centenarian Aspirant. He had taken prizes in his boyhood at the College of Moulins, where he was born, and he had been crowned by the hand of the Duc de Nivernais, whom he called the Duc de Nevers. Neither the Convention, nor the death of Louis XVI, nor the Napoleon, nor the return of the Bourbons, nor anything else had been able to efface the memory of this crowning. The Duc de Nevers was in his eyes the great figure of the century. "What a charming grand seigneur," he said, "and what a fine air he had with his blue ribbon." In the eyes of M. Gillenormand, Catherine II had made reparation for the crime of the partition of Poland by purchasing, for 3,000 rubles, the secret of the elixir of gold from Bestucheff. He grew animated on this subject. "The elixir of gold!" he exclaimed, "the yellow dye of Bestucheff. General Lamotte's drops in the 18th century. This was the great remedy for the catastrophes of love, the panacea against Venus. At 1 louis the half-ounce phial, Louis XV sent 200 phials of it to the Pope. He would have been greatly irritated and thrown off his balance had anyone told him that the elixir of gold is nothing but the perchloride of iron." M. Gillenormand adored the Bourbons, and had a horror of 1789. He was forever narrating in what manner he had saved himself during the Terror, and how he had been obliged to display a vast deal of gaiety and cleverness in order to escape having his head cut off. If any young man ventured to pronounce a eulogium on the Republic in his presence, he turned purple and grew so angry that he was on the point of swooning. He sometimes alluded to his 90 years, and said, "I hope that I shall not see 93 twice." On these occasions he hinted to people that he meant to live to be 100. End of Book 2, Chapter 4. Recording by Greg Bowman.